Hello listener, welcome to lecture 7, and this is the last video for this tutorial. So let's get started with the SQL triggers. So this is very important topic for the developers, database administrator, and .NET developers, DBAs, data analysts, data scientists. Business analysts, they can ignore this topic, or if they want to listen it for their knowledge purpose, they are more than welcome to. So what are the triggers? So these triggers means they are automatically executes when an event occurs. So what happened is that let's look into Macy's example. So let's say Macy's is offering that if you order over the $100, then there will be some beauty item will ship to you, or a tote bag will ship to you. So for this situation, or for this scenario to be handled from the database standpoint, you may want to create a trigger that as soon as an order with a record is inserted, which has the value over the $100, then create the another row automatically into maybe the same table, or the another table which insert a row saying this item, tote bag or the beauty item, free. So this is how you can utilize the SQL triggers. This is what the use of the triggers is. There is another example over here. So the triggers are of two type: after trigger and the instead of triggers. So these triggers are operated on the inserted data or the deleted data. So after trigger means once you have inserted the record, or you have deleted the record, after then you want to trigger that logic. So those are the after trigger. Instead of trigger means, instead of directly inserting or deleting, you first want to check for some particular condition, and if that satisfied is, then go ahead. That is what the instead of trigger is for. So there is a example for the after insert trigger and for the instead of trigger. So here for the after insert trigger, if you see here, what it does is that once a record is inserted into the customer table, then you want to insert the another record into the transaction log table, where you may want to log some information. Maybe it is inserted, maybe the order is over $100, you want to log something when such record is inserted. So you can use the after insert trigger for such scenarios. And for the instead of delete trigger example, here you will see you are saying that you can check for the customer ID. Maybe for some customer, you have some royal customer or some premium customer, you want to check that that if customer is a loyal with an ID or with this number, do not delete them at all from your database, otherwise allow them to delete something. Okay, so these again can be achieved using the instead of delete trigger, and this is very, very self-explanatory. You can actually play with it. Okay, so another is like triggers really sounds awesome, right? But they do have their own disadvantage. The first very disadvantage you need to know is that do not execute any long running tasks using the SQL triggers, because when the triggers are getting executed, they actually put the lock on those tables. So if you are going to run a very long running task, that's when it is going to lock down those tables. And if you have a live database where millions of customers are hitting it, then you may have a performance issue over there. So that is the most important disadvantage you need to know for the SQL triggers. And these are the other one which you can go through, and very straightforward. So next is the cursors. So cursors, they were really useful in year somewhere in 2009, 8 and so on. But after then, people have the other way to achieve the same logic and to achieve the same purpose. Instead of using the cursor, they are using the SSIS. They are writing the stored procedure in such a way. What the cursors are actually, so if you are a developer like the Java, .NET or any kind of a language developer, you are making use of lot of for each loop, where you are iterating through all of the records, and you might be then modifying it or accessing some information or dealing with that data. So that is what the cursors do. That for loop is basically nothing but the cursors, that it iterates over the record, and then whatever the processing you want to do with that record, you can use it using the cursor. There is really a very, very 1% chance of getting being asked at the interview about the cursors. They are really kind of out of a date right now because a lot of things have come up, but it is good to know. So the cursors, in order to basically use the cursor, you have to declare it, then you have to open it, then you have to fetch the record, and whatever processing you wanna do, you do it, then close, and then the deallocate in order to release the memory space. So this is the syntax look like. Okay. So next is the transaction. It is very important to know. So transaction, what are transaction? They are executed as a single unit. So that's mean anything you are trying to execute inside the transaction block, that will entirely be success or the failure. So this is a good practice, or most of the practice which is getting practice at the organization, are when you're trying to delete some production data. Usually those queries are getting put under the transaction statement, so that if any of them fail for a reason, you do not want to end up with the half of the information sitting in your database which is irrelevant and cannot be connected to. So any statement which you think, all those statements, they should either all be executed or none of them to be executed, should be put under the transactions. So this is how you do. You can use the try and catch block over here. So the try is like you are trying this transaction, delete from student where ID is this. If it get deleted, you wanna, without any error, you want to commit it. That's when go ahead and commit it. But if there is any error occurred during this delete statement, you want to catch it and then you want to roll back. That's when do not delete it, just go back to its original state and then end. So this is this is the syntax of the transaction. And there is one more important thing to note is the save transaction. Let's say you have a multiple transaction, but after one or two transaction, if third one fails, you still want to commit the first two, then you can define the save points where it behave like a pointer, that that after then the transaction can be rolled back, but before then it will be committed. So you can define the save points. Now the temporary tables are similar like the tables, it's just that they are not actual tables which is getting stored like your actual tables on the DB. So when you're dealing with a very big data set, sometimes you have to do some intermediate processing, and you need that processing in the form of the table. So that where the temporary tables and the variables come into play. So you can, maybe you have multiple tables, but you want the another table which will store all this information, but you do not want to save it in your DB because it's just an intermediate result which once you do a processing is useless for you. So this is how you can create the temporary tables. They are created with the hash sign, then you give a name to it. You same way you declare the columns in the table, the same way you do it with the temporary tables, and then you insert into this table, and then it behave similar like the tables. Okay. So next is the table variables. So table variables and the temporary table, you can achieve the task using any of these, but table variable do have some restrictions, like you cannot have the non-cluster index over them, you cannot create any kind of a constraint, you cannot create any default value, and statics cannot be run against this table variable. So the table variable are really useful in order to perform any kind of a table value functions. So what are functions? Okay, functions, like in the coding or in the programming, when you create a functions, you define all your entire logic, business logic inside those functions, and then you simply, the outsider app just simply call your function without knowing the actual implementation of that function. This is the similar concept you have over here for the SQL. You basically create the function, you put the entire logic over here, and you then just simply call that function. So then there is a question arise, how do you decide whether to create a function or a stored procedure? So so the limitation of the function is that you can only return a table or a valued function or a single value from a function, unlike stored procedure where you can return the result set. That's when you can have a multiple select statement, you can have a multiple result set you can view from the stored procedure, but you cannot achieve that using functions here. Okay, because at a point it can return just one table or a variable or a value function. So another restriction is like you cannot create the temporary functions over here. You cannot perform the action like writing to the table. With the SQL you can insert the data, You can play with it, delete the data, you can select, and everything you can do. But with the user defined function, you cannot even write to a table. So that's mean you cannot do that at all. You can just select, you can just run the select statement. Okay, and moreover, it cannot return a result set, only a single table data type. That is the another difference. So that is the last topic of this course, and I hope, because I think I have covered almost 99.9% of every basic SQL which needs to be known. And if anything I have missed, or anything I should have covered, or anything I should have explained in more detail, please do write back to me. And thanks for watching this video.